first, let's start with the AIRBRUSH compressor. So this provides a consistent supply of compressed air to the AIRBRUSH. So here we're going to be using the Iwata Silverjet compressor, and to turn on there is a button on the side. So this is the pressure gauge which controls the PSI. This stands for per square inch and relates to the pressure of the air that's coming out of the AIRBRUSH. So this can be controlled by the dial on the left hand side. So when working on the face you don't want to go above around 15 psi. I'm then going to screw the air hose to the compressor, and when you're doing this you want to make sure that it's done quite tightly. With the other end of the air hose you want to then connect that to the AIRBRUSH. So this is going to allow the air to be forced out of the compressor and through the AIRBRUSH, and that's really important that you get that tightly screwed on to the AIRBRUSH and the compressor. So going through the AIRBRUSH gun itself, here we have the nozzle and the needle, and this is where the fluid comes out of the AIRBRUSH. And this is the cup where all the fluid is added, and you can put a cap on there to prevent spillage. And this is the push button, so press down for air and pull back for the paint. You can use the compressor to hold the gun when it's not in use. So here I'm going to be taking air-based, water-based paint and making sure to give it a good shake before pouring into the cup. So turning on the compressor, I'm going to show you how to change the PSI. So you want to make sure the air is coming out of the gun. So by doing that you need to be pressing down on the push button, and then at the same time whilst you're pushing down you want to be spinning the dial, and then you can use the pressure gauge for guidance to see how high or low that is. And here I'm going to show you how forceful the paint can come out when you press the push button all the way down and back. So blending the amount of air and paint takes a lot of practice. And this is called back bubbling, and if you want to mix two colours you would apply them into the cup, cover the nozzle and then press down on the push button. And sometimes you may find that the AIRBRUSH blocks, so before you disassemble the whole gun, remove the handle, and then you want to remove the needle chucking nut, and then gently push the needle in and out to try and break through the blockage. So before I apply any paint to the paper or a body, I would always check the colour and pressure on a tissue. So firstly I'm going to create dots on the paper, but moving the AIRBRUSH further away each time. Then I had a go at creating dots from the same height, and this really helps with balancing the force of the air and paint with the push button, which we discussed before. I'm then using a piece of paper to create a straight line, and because I'm working quite close to the paper, that is called hard masking, but holding the gun further away gives a more of a shadow effect, which is known as soft masking. So make sure you check the pressure again and the colour before using the AIRBRUSH. So I've pre-drawn some circles, straight and squiggly lines, and this is going to help when practicing control with an AIRBRUSH. So some people like to work with their hand rested on the paper, but I personally like to use my left hand on my wrist to give me extra support and control. When creating a block colour, I always use circular motions with the AIRBRUSH gun, and this creates more of an even coverage with no streaks. So following the same techniques, have a go at the other lines. So when trying to spray a clean fine line, don't start by pointing the airbrush at the exact spot where you want the line to begin. Start a little bit earlier, moving smoothly towards the target point with the air only, and when you're in line with the point, just pull back on the lever for the paint, and similarly at the end of the line, switch off the paint but carry on for a second or two with air only. When working with an airbrush, it's really good to have fluid motions when creating freehand work, so have a go at creating random shapes and lines with varying thicknesses and opacity. Now I'm going to show you how to clean the airbrush. So I'm taking the Airbase Aqua Thinner and Rinse. This can be used to thin down a paint or completely flush the fluid out. So I'm going to fill the cup about halfway. You want to turn on the compressor and grab either a piece of tissue or paper and spray out the fluid and rinse. I'm then going to repeat the process again, and as you can see there's far less paint and more fluid at this point. I'm then going to place the tissue over the nozzle and pushing down on the push button. This will produce a back spray in the paint passage and dislodge any paint residue from the nozzle and paint passage. I'm then going to be pouring a small amount of IPA into the cup, and this will really help to break down any remaining paint. Repeating the same process of flushing out the paint and IPA until it runs clear, and then repeat the back bubbling technique as well. At this point we have flushed out the majority of the paint, but as you can see there is a slight residue left in the cup, so this needs to be removed to ensure that the airbrush works correctly next time. I've got IPA in a glass bowl, and I've just used that small blue brush dipped in IPA just to clean out the paint in the cup. However, we need to ensure that every part is clean, so I'm taking a plastic dental floss, and I'm not using a Q-tip as the cotton can often get stuck in the gun and cause blockages. I'm first removing the handle and then the needle chucking nut. I advise that you either dismantle parts into a bowl or in a contained area so you don't lose any parts. You can then remove the needle, and as you can see there is a lot of excess paint on there. You then remove the spring case and the needle chucking guide, and the lever at the front can almost sometimes get stuck, so you might need to twist this a little just to get that out. And then the push button should just twist and come out quite easily. And then you want to remove the needle and the nozzle cap, and then you should just be left with the body of the gun. So here is an image of the airbrush gun removed in order, and I advise that you do this when you're starting out as it can help you remember how to reassemble. You then want to dip a tissue into the IPA and make sure that you thoroughly clean the needle. You then want to work your way through all of the parts, cleaning with the dental floss and IPA. I like working with this tool as it's quite malleable and gets into all the hard to reach places. As it's also made of plastic, it also don't have to worry about it causing any blockages as well, like a Q-tip might. So again, I'm just working my way through cleaning all of the parts with the IPA and the dental floss. I'm then going to take a tissue and dry off all of the parts, just to make sure that it's nice and dry when you put it all together and can go straight back into the box. So working your way down, start putting all the parts back together, a bit like a conveyor belt. To insert the push button, it should just twist and slot in place quite nicely, and ensure that it bounces up and down, and that's how you know that it's in place correctly. So next is the needle chucking guide, and you want to ensure that the lever at the front is pushed forward and sits against the push button, and you may just have to twist that in a little bit. And next we have the needle, and hopefully if we put everything in correctly, that should push straight down and you'll be able to see it out of the front, and that's how you know it's all the way in. And then you want to put the spring on and the spring case, and just keep screwing that down until it won't screw anymore. At this point, it's worth checking that the push button presses down and back, and that's how you know you've done everything correctly. And then finally, you just want to screw on the needle chucking nut, and then finally the handle. And there we have it. Your airbrush is thoroughly cleaned and ready to be put back in its box. So in this quick demo, you've learned how to set up an airbrush, a small range of techniques, and how to correctly clean the gun. I hope that you have fun practicing in the future.